Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to pick up with talking about checks and balances, separation of powers, and federalism. These are three closely related topics. The first two are really one topic treated. Federalism is a separate topic, but it's really closely related. The result of this is that it may run over 20 minutes. If it does, I will probably break this up into a part one and part two video so you can watch them separately. And I'll try to break at a point that makes sense. So, what I'm going to do today, as before, I'm going to have a couple of quick announcements. I'm going to go through a quick review of where this topic came from, what I've already covered, and then I'm going to talk about how power is split up, the idea behind it, the specifics of splitting it up into three branches of government, of splitting Congress into two halves, and then federalism, power being shared between state and national government. Um, so, in the announcements, the textbook sign up is working. Finish the process if you haven't. Four people have not yet signed up. Go ahead and do that. If you signed up for the publisher's temporary access, it should seamlessly go into the regular access at the end of the temporary period. So at the end of the trial period, you are paid up and good to go. The one thing I would suggest is maybe take a screenshot of your grades right before your temporary period runs out. That way, if there's any question, the publisher's representative I met with today for about half an hour, and she assured me that even if that didn't happen, that your grades would still be there. But just if you want that extra insurance, take a screenshot or something. Um, I've added a new optional module with extra resources. So these are just things to help you with studying, to help you with better understanding things if you're having trouble with them. And I'm going to add some things there that are not going to be in the regular modules. A big one is this video series, Crash Course Government and Politics, off YouTube. It's very well done. Um, very good coverage of the material in short 10 to 12-minute videos. They have some jokes and humor. The jokes are worse even than any jokes that I would tell, though, so that's pretty bad. Don't expect to laugh a lot. You're going to be laughing at them more than with them, but that's okay. They're actually really good. Um, and their video on compromise in the Constitution is actually in this module, because I really want you to take a look at that. I think it will really help you with understanding some of the material on the compromises that went into the making of the Constitution. Um, so, review the basic philosophy, and here I mean the basic philosophy behind the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution, behind the founding of the American government, was classical liberalism. This again is Enlightenment liberalism, European liberalism. It's not the liberalism that happens when Ken Paxton complains about liberals in the Democratic Party. It's a completely different meaning of the term. Actually, what it means is capitalist democracy. Um, the basic good in classical liberalism is empowering individuals. The basic bad is too much government power and government abusing power. Um, the solution in the American system of government was to split power up so that no one had too much of it. The flaws in the system that we talked about a little bit in the last one uh, is that some of the things in the Constitution actually conflict with classical liberal ideals, um, because some of the things in the system actually do not empower individuals. They infringe on liberty. They give the government too much power. They are abuses of power. So there were some inherent contradictions in terms of classical liberal ideals. Those flaws were largely the necessary result of compromises without which the Constitution wouldn't have happened. And you can decide for yourself if that's bad or good. I think that they were necessary, and the Constitution overall has turned out pretty well. Um, there's no evidence that it could have turned out better had there not been a Constitution. So, um, so what about the Constitution? This is a quote from the National Center for Constitutional Studies. that I just think is an excellent summary. The Constitution was devised with an ingenious and intricate built in system of checks and balances to guard the people's liberty against combinations of government power. Um, and that website, the National Center for Constitutional Studies, has a wealth of information for you. Um, in particular, they have a page that goes through some of the checks and balances. Um, so, let's talk about how that power is split up. So this is the idea is this: to split up power, to separate power among competing groups that have different interests. And that doesn't mean that one likes football and one likes baseball. It means interests in the sense of different financial and career and political goals. So goals instead of interests. So they have different things that they want. Um, the power of one group then balances the power of competing groups. So they have roughly equal amounts of power, so that the one can't overpower one of the others on its own, and certainly can't overpower more than one of the others. Um, and then so the competing groups keep each other in check. So if group one wants something and it's considered an abuse of power, either because it encroaches on the people's liberty or because it encroaches on the power of the other two groups, those other two groups will push back and keep them in check. Um, and no one group then has enough power to act alone, because the power is split up and there's multiple groups. So the result is, that we have what we call separation of powers, which is just separate power among competing groups, and a system of checks and balances. One group balances the power of competing groups, and that keeps the other groups in check. So checks and balances. Um, so let's talk about those checks and balances and how splitting up the powers. So the first part is how are the powers split up, the separation. And the first part of the separation of powers is separation into three branches of government. Congress is the first branch. It's defined in Article 1 of the Constitution. It's the Article 1 branch. And Article 1 starts out by saying that the legislative power is given to Congress, and that's what it calls it, the legislative power. That literally just means the power to make the laws. Um, After saying that Congress has the lawmaking power, it gives a long list of specific powers, and that's about specific kinds of laws that Congress can make. And really, it's actually a to-do list for Congress, because a lot of those things in that list were things that hadn't been done under the Articles of Confederation and that needed to be done. So, in some sense, it was a to-do list. Um, but one thing in particular that Congress is given the power to do is to set the tax and spending policy. So the Treasury Department and the Secretary of the Treasury write the checks to pay the nation's bills, but the power to do that, and the Treasury Secretary collects the taxes. But the power to do that is all defined by Congress, and Congress has the power to set out what the Treasury is allowed to do in terms of collecting taxes and in terms of spending money. Um, so the second branch, defined in Article 2 of the Constitution, is the presidency. And Article 2 says the executive power of the United States is vested in the president. Well, what is executive power? Well, it's managerial power. If we talk about the CEO, the chief executive officer of a corporation today, it's the chief manager. So that's what the president is. Now, I want to be clear. He's not the chief executive officer of all the people in the country. He's the chief executive officer of the government of the country. So the United States is not a business um, that we're all employees of. We're citizens of the United States. We're actually supposed to be the boss, right? Um, we're the boss, not the president. The president is the boss, the chief manager of the government. And so he has the managerial power, the executive power. So he can appoint officials of both the civilian and military officials. He actually also has the power to fire them. Now, in appointing them, he has to have consent of Congress, specifically the Senate. But firing them, he can do on his own. He has the power to make treaties with other countries with the consent of the Senate and advice of the Senate. He's the commander in chief of the military, which means all the generals have to do what he says. He's not the top general. It's kind of like he is, but he is a civilian, and that's actually an important distinction. Our military is answerable to civilian power and not the other way around. And he prosecutes offenses under the law. So it's like he is supposed to be the chief prosecutor. Now that power is delegated to the attorney general and the Justice Department and the president. It has become an institutional norm since the Constitution was passed that the president doesn't directly get involved in criminal cases, prosecuting them. But it is one of his powers. It is actually done with the delegated power of the president. So the last branch, the Article 3 branch, is the courts. And the Article 3 says that the judicial power is vested in the Supreme Court of the United States and whatever inferior courts the Congress shall choose to create. So the Supreme Court, plus whatever other courts Congress creates, have the judicial power. And what is judicial power? It's the ability to pronounce judgment under the law. And Article 3 is shorter than the other two articles. And it was sort of understood that people knew what judicial power was because there was a long history of what's called the common law in England. And under the common law, judges had a lot of power. And so judicial power, I think that the framers of the Constitution thought it was fairly well understood that judicial power was about more than just sitting there while a trial was going on. It's about actually pronouncing judgment, and it's about interpreting the laws and applying them to specific cases. Um, and that's going to be important when we talk about the checks and balances. Um, so, three branches of government, the basic powers: Congress makes the laws, the president executes the laws and governs, manages the government, and the courts interpret and apply the laws. So, some examples of checks. Congress has some checks. The first one is that Congress has the power to impeach presidents and justices of the Supreme Court, as well as all the people, the lower level appointed officials in the executive branch that work for the president, and all of the judges on all the other federal courts. Congress has the power, if they commit a crime, to remove them from office. Um, and it's a pretty broad power because what constitutes a crime is not particularly well defined. It's up to Congress to decide that. Congress has the power to override presidential vetoes, which I'll get to in a second, by a 2/3 majority vote in both houses. So it takes the House and the Senate together to do that. And Congress has a particular power to check the power of the Supreme Court because Congress is allowed to restrict the extent of the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. It's up to Congress to say what cases, other than those defined in the Constitution, the Supreme Court can actually judge. Um, so the president has checks. The president can veto bills passed by the Congress. That's a big check on Congress's ability. Um, and the president has the power to pardon criminals that are convicted by the courts. That's just one example of a check that the president has on the courts. What about the courts? Well, this is fairly complicated, and they have really just one check, and so it comes from this. So they interpret and apply the laws. Well, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution itself says that it is the supreme law of the land. So that means they're allowed to interpret, it's their job to interpret and apply the Constitution. So what that implies is that they have the power to review laws passed by Congress to see if they comply with the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution. They also have the power to review the acts of the president to see if they comply with the Constitution. And we call this judicial review. So they have the power of judicial review to determine whether things are constitutional or unconstitutional. So Congress can override vetoes, impeach judges and executive branch officials, and they can set the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. The president can veto acts of Congress and pardon convicted criminals. The courts have judicial review to decide the constitutionality of laws and acts of presidents. These are not all of the checks, these are just a sample. So there are more, but these are some of the important ones. So, splitting up the power, there's a little bit more to it than that, than just the splitting into three branches. One of the other ways it's split up is that Congress is divided into two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And what's important here is that for a bill to become a law, both houses have to pass it. So if the House of Representatives thinks something is a great idea and 75% of them vote for it, and the Senate doesn't even debate it, doesn't even look at it, it doesn't go anywhere. So that's another check. Those houses have to get their heads together to even send something to the president. So another check, another way the power is split up, is that bills regarding revenue, that is taxation, are required to start in the House of Representatives. So all of the money stuff has to start in Congress. So Congress is in charge of the money. And then within Congress, that has to start in the House of Representatives. And the Senate has a role in it because everything has to pass both houses. And so the Senate can amend it. The Senate can refuse to pass it if they want to. And so they may have to negotiate with the House of Representatives. But ultimately, starting the process is the House's responsibility. So one of the other things that's important to realize here is that the House members are elected by district and the senators by state. And originally, senators were appointed by the states. Why is that important? Well, I said that the idea was to split up power among groups that have different interests. Well, the House members are elected by smaller districts every 2 years, so they're definitely more answerable to the people because they are elected every 2 years in these small districts. The senators are elected by their entire state and they're elected every 6 years. So they are not as immediately subject to the same changing whims of public opinion. They're still subject to the people because they're still subject to re-election, but they're not as subject to just sort of the way the wind blows. Okay, so I'm going to actually pause it here and make a second recording that will be part 2, where I'm going to pick up on federalism with national and state power. But the reason that these go together is because it's about the same idea, which is how is power split up in the Constitution in order to keep power from being abused and in order to protect the liberty of the people. So I'll pick up with federalism, national and state power here in just a little bit.